This is a 160 Q&A practice test. Plaintiff attorney Mr. Polk, capital P-O-L-K. Defense attorney Mr. Sims, capital S-I-M-S. And we'll start with defense attorney. Ready? Here we go. In other words, everybody doesn't have to go to jail even if there might be indications of some kind of criminal misconduct, right? Yes. For example, a traffic stop, right? Right. Spirit of the law versus the order of the law. Thank you. So if you were to stop somebody for doing the California roll on a stop sign, hey officer, I slowed down, and if you felt in your contact with that individual that your contact with them was enough to change their behavior in the future, you're not mandated by law to write them a citation, are you? No. And you've received training as of April 18th, 2008. Needles alone do not constitute a basis for arrest, right? I don't know. So would it be fair to say on June 3rd, 2003, you didn't know if you could arrest anybody for those needles? I would have asked if I wasn't sure, which I probably did or would have, and it's your testimony. You're not sure what, if any, substance was on that spoon in the closet, right? Right. And typically to know what substance it would be, well, would you agree it was a small amount, if anything, on that spoon, whatever substance it was? Yes, it was enough to notice that there was stuff on it, but yes, and based on your experience at that time, would it be fair to say that special evidence technicians would need to collect that small of amount for testing, right? Evidence technicians? Yes. No. I would have been able to do it. You could have been able to do it. Yes. Did you have the technology with you? We have field test kits that we could have tested if there was enough to test for. And did you think there was enough to test? If it honestly didn't, I don't believe it crossed my mind. Those test kits are available to other officers. For example, Officer Ross, yes. So if somebody had a reservation, it could have been done, right? Yes. And so I'm certain, as it relates to your testimony as to whether or not she could have heard comments about the lingerie, I believe in listening to you. What you're simply saying is it's possible she could have heard it. In other words, there's nothing preventing her from hearing it. Is that right? Yes. Versus you're certain she heard it? Yes. And you don't know if she heard it, right? No, I don't. There's a discussion on redirect about her sitting in a chair for 2 hours, right? Yes. Prior to June 3rd, 2003, had you been to other crime scenes? Yes. And had you been to crime scenes where victim's property was involved, let's say either a car or a house? Yes. Based on your training and experience, it is, in fact, the practice to essentially keep victims out of their own homes in some cases, right? In some cases. One of the reasons is so they don't contaminate evidence, right? Right. You received training about what's known as chain of custody and evidence, yes. And part of that involves you have to be able to establish from the point you recover a piece of evidence to the point it gets booked into evidence, you have to be able to say who had that evidence, where and how it was booked, yes. And so if victims are free to walk around even their own homes, they might in fact contaminate that chain of custody, correct? It's possible. So one of the reasons for her sitting there was to make sure she didn't destroy evidence, right? Right. And not because she's necessarily a suspect in anything, right? Yes. And regardless if somebody is a victim or a suspect, officer safety is always a paramount concern to officers on the scene of a crime, right? Yes. And so regardless, you want to make sure that people are safe, right? Right. Have you had experience where even victims get emotional in cases? Absolutely. In fact, through your training and experience, you've learned that victims can attack police, correct? Yes. And so those are some of the reasons you might want to keep an eye on her regardless of her implication in any criminal misconduct. Right. Thank you, Ms. Blake. No further, Your Honor. Redirect briefly. Is it your testimony, ma'am, the reason you had her sitting there was you were scared because on your training that victims sometimes attack officers? No. Okay, she was on felony probation. I don't remember if she was, but apparently she was. You're doing a search of her house? Yes. You're finding drug paraphernalia at her house? Yes. You made arrests of other people for drug paraphernalia at her house. The drug paraphernalia was later, but yes. And I just want to be clear about one thing. Is it your testimony that finding all the syringes in her closet and her being possibly 11,550 is not enough for you to arrest her? Is that what you're telling us right now? No, it is enough. I would think so. And when you talked about when defense counsel talked about whether you have discretion of enforcement of the laws, are you telling us as a Westland police officer you can see two different people violating the same law and you can choose, hey, I'm just going to arrest that person and not that person? No. Okay, when someone commits a crime in front of you, ma'am, while you were an officer, as an officer protecting the community, is it your job to enforce the laws? Yes, it is. Okay, and enforcement of those laws as a prosecutor of our community, do you make arrests, or is it just discretionary of, hey, I'm going to arrest that person but not that person? I'm sorry, what was the beginning of your question? I understand where you're going, but what was the beginning? Well, when you were talking about discretionary, whether you have discretion to arrest someone, it's not discretion. And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not discretion if you see two different people violating the same law. I have discretion which one to arrest. Correct. Do you have discretion, ma'am? If you see someone as an officer violating the law, that you have discretion to just let them go and just, excuse me, not just to let them go, but just to turn your head? I would say no. Okay. You said, well, actually, one of the defense questions was in contact alone enough to sometimes change the behavior for the future. Do you remember that line of questioning? Yes. All right, the word list. Officer Ross, capital O on officer, Ross, capital R-O-S-S. Ms., MS period, Blake, capital B-L-A-K-E. And 11,550 is just all numbers, 11,11550. Westland, capital W-E-S-T-L-A-N-D, all one word. And that is it for the word list, and that will conclude our 160 Q&A practice test.